So my name's Tom Cole. I'm a PhD student at Goldsmiths College. I started in September, and basically my PhD is looking at broadening and deepening emotional engagement in video games with an emphasis and focus on rules, systems and mechanics. Because where I see people doing it up to now is in using quite filmic conventions, etc. And I'd like to really focus on what makes games games and how that brings about emotion in people. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm really quite impressed. Really impressed with the quality of talks we've had today. I've learned ever such a lot from being here since 9:30 this morning, so I hope that you learn at least a few things here. So I hope I can bring a bit of a different perspective today, and so what I'm basically going to talk about is, this isn't really like a how-to, but it's more of a bit of a challenge to games developers and to all of us. This includes me. So I'm going to set in some questions, giving some suggestions for answers, and maybe a little bit of a call to arms kind of mentality. So, I mean, further to that, just a disclaimer, I'm not here as a highly successful developer. I'm here as a thinker and a theoriser. I am mainly an academic. I have been in the games industry, but at the moment, here, right now, I'm talking as a thinker and a theoriser. However, I hope that you'll find that that thinking is grounded in reality enough to ensure that basically you're going to get something out of this. I may say some things that you don't like, I may say some things that you don't agree with, and I will probably say some things that you think are plain wrong. And if I don't, then I probably haven't communicated what I wanted to. And certainly if you're a supporter of a certain hashtag, you will almost definitely spontaneously combust and burst into flames in a hail of fury. So if you're one of those people, backdoor for your own safety. So important question is, why is this topic important? And I don't know about you, but I see very, very little coverage of this kind of question. Certainly at the conferences that I go to. Maybe I'm going to the wrong conferences. You're not going to see a lot of those. There's nothing I could do about this slide to make the text bigger really, but for those emotions that you can see, you've got all sorts here: helpless, hostile, humiliated, puzzled, peaceful, paranoid, sad, satisfied, undecided. Think about how many of those emotions do you see in games on a regular basis. Some of them you do, but many of them you don't, if you have ever seen some of those in games. What percentage of games would have those in them? So I think this topic is absolutely vitally important for the evolution of games. It's vitally important for the evolution of our medium. If we're going to advance in this medium, then we need to diversify. And that means more than just have fun. And I will come back to that theme repeatedly as I go on. Games can have an impact that other media really can't do. And we don't want to hamstring ourselves with a kind of thinking that's led us. So I'm going to talk a bit about where we are now, how I think we've got there, and then how I think we can start to move on. We don't want to hamstring ourselves with sort of limiting thinking. I always kind of explain it like this. If you were to walk into a bookshop or a video shop, do you remember video shops? They were a thing once upon a time. But if you were to walk into a video shop, gosh, do you remember? Or a bookshop now, the 5 or so that still exist in the UK, you can go into those shops and you can look around, say the bookshop foils or whatever, look at the fiction section, and there are all sorts of emotional experiences available to you there. There's all sorts of messages being communicated, maybe moral, spiritual, sociological messages. But you can get a vast range of emotional experiences, whatever is your bag, yeah? You go into a game shop, it's not quite the same. Now, you can also tell that photo is a few years old, even though it's pre-owned, some of the titles there. And obviously game, being our most prominent retail thing, retail, you like to say, is in decline, well it is. There's no which ways about it. Retail is kind of, high street retail is in decline, etc. So people say, oh yeah, but that's not the best place to look. What about digital delivery? Well, I took this photo of Steam's most played games a couple of weeks ago. And I think if you look at the games that are most popular, that people are playing, so granted, it's not exactly the same as games that are available, but it's a metric to roughly go by. I had to choose something. So these are the most popular games about 2 weeks ago being played. there's not really a huge amount of variety in terms of theme or ideas come through in those games. Mechanics are different, but the themes, the ideas, the kind of emotional experiences tend to be a bit more similar. I mean, mainly what I'm talking about is, where are the games that talk to us about the human condition? Yeah, where are the games that are challenging us about life and make us think? I mean, they do exist, all right? We can all name some, but those games tend to be the exception rather than the rule. And it doesn't have to be like this. It really doesn't. So, the most crucial thing about games, I think, is that they allow us to role play. For those who can't see, it's how people see role playing, my mum, neighbour, and how I see it. So games allow us to occupy that role within games. Yeah, this is their unique advantage. We play a part in their workings, and all those things are agency, imagination, the system's analysis on the part of the player, experimental behaviour, it all comes out of our interactions with games. So what that adds up, it gives us a unique perspective on life. Games can do that more powerfully than other media. In a film, you're at best a voyeur. In literature, you are powerless to change anything that goes on. But games force us to take on a role, and we can have authorial control as designers and developers over those roles. We can communicate things by putting people in that position. So these are some of the unique things. And I think, as a general rule, we are selling ourselves short as a medium, as it stands. This is not just artistically, this is commercially as well. Because often people making games for a relatively small segment of the population. Now, of course, that has been influenced by the uptake of mobile in particular, not to mention the increase in digital delivery. So some people, that's widened the audience, etc. The Wii made a big widening of the audience. You could argue for and against that. That's another topic. Several years ago, but by and large, games are made for a relatively small amount of the population. So often, games are cannibalising that same section. So what about all the other people who would like to be gamers, who probably would? They don't realise that they would like to be gamers, but they're not particularly inspired by what's there at the moment. So how about them? We talk about discoverability a lot of time. Massive problem if you're especially if you're a small indie, or if you're on the App Store. Discoverability. How do you get your fantastic game? And most of the time they are fantastic. A lot of the time they are fantastic games. But how do you get that out to people? This is especially true of indies where the marketing budgets are minimal or nothing other than your time, which is still valuable, of course, but I mean financially. So why don't some of us start to think about making games that are really pushing the boat, that are really different? Really different in ways that, rather than just being just fun in a different way, in different ways. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. And then from another commercial point of view, untapped markets means untapped cash. So I'm not speaking purely from an artistic point of view, because I think this always maps onto commercial gain and commercial opportunities anyway. If there's people not playing games that you think that you could reach, that means you've got untapped cash pockets that you could reach. So I want to try and kind of make that pitch, because at the end of the day, we need to earn a living and still put food on the table now, innit? And you could say, well, these people who would be games, but they don't find anything that's interesting, maybe they don't know about games, possibly. But I think actually, a lot of people tend to view games as shallow time wasters. Either shallow time wasters, they're fun, but they're good whilst waiting for the bus, or they're good while sitting down having a poo, or something like that, waiting for it to come out. Sorry, a bit too graphic. But these things just to waste time and kill time. Either that, or we've got the big blockbuster productions that we see on the level of these things. People obviously see them on TV, they see them on the tube, etc. They've got the big blockbuster promotions. So we could all name examples that are not shallow time wasters. I certainly can. I'm sure every single person in this room can. That are not shallow time wasters. That are not just big, dumb Hollywood production alikes. And that these are the views of people that don't really know anything about games. But what I kind of want to challenge people to think about is, do we also kind of treat them the same way with what we make? You know, like, we know what games are capable of. I don't have to convince anybody here about that. But in what we make, do we also treat games like that? Are we thinking about making games that are trying to push artistic boundaries, etc.? Or do we make more fun experiences that people have really good fun with, but they kind of didn't really change their life and didn't really make them think any differently? So, again, this is often seen as a kind of triple A's versus, this is going to be David and Goliath. This is like the most sensible, sort of propagandist picture of David and Goliath. You go look for that on the internet, you get some strange pictures. So we often think about this as like AAA publishers versus the Indian. AAAs are boring, predictable, conservative, sequels. Indies are creative and pure and, you know, new and progressive. But that just isn't always true, is it? I think we have to be honest sometimes, that's not always true. Yeah, often indies have very clever reimaginings or adaptations of AAA concepts and some fantastic mechanics, and obviously tons of stuff that would never get made in the AAA sphere. I mean, this is all fairly common sense stuff, but often the themes and the stories that are told, the ideas that are at the core of that game, are pretty much the same as a lot of the other stuff out there. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a real indie champion, and that's where my heart is at. Is really with indies, and I play a very wide range of games. I play AAA games, I play indie games. I don't play many mobile or free-to-play games because they bore the crap out of me. But apart from those, you know, I'm a gamer like any one of you, and so yeah, there is hope in the diversity, and we will get there eventually. But we're not going to get there unless we actually really start to think about where we are and where we want to be as a medium. Okay, so. The question is then, well, how have we got here, and how do I think we got here? So you can obviously do a whole talk on this, but I think it's important, like, just to spend a couple of minutes talking about this, because your history informs you know, if you know about how you got here, it informs your present, and if you know more about how you got to where you are, that informs you more about where you can go in the future. And it's worth thinking about this. And I think so. One of them is we've been driven by this. More that if anyone can't see at the bottom, this says more pixels. Okay, we're a technology-driven industry. You know, first we had 8-bit, then we had 16-bit, then we had 32-bit, and then we had no one gives a damn anymore about the bits. And then we had 3D, and more polygons, and more textures, and more lighting, more effects, and more little AI people running around, etc. We're always driven by those kind of technical restraints. This is what we talk about, this is what we spend our time and our money on. This is what we often focus on. I mean, at the moment, everyone's talking about VR. Do people recognise this film? Yeah. Nice. Okay, so, yeah, at the moment, we're talking about VR a lot. And VR is cool. And there is some really amazing stuff coming out of it. I've tried both Oculus and the Morpheus headsets several times, so you know, I do think it's really cool, but I can't help feel that we've been here before, like with, oh, this technology is going to change everything, this technology is going to allow us to do like completely new things, amazing things. I'm not entirely convinced that VR is actually going to solve a lot of the very deep-seated authorial problems that we have in games culture as a medium, you know? We have a technology fetish, and I would strongly advise you to not do a Google image search for that on the internet. Trying to find an image to illustrate that point in the talk was difficult. So, yeah, so we have this technology fetish, and you know, the problem is that we're always focusing on what comes next. What's around the corner? What's the next big thing? We never stop and learn how to really use what we've already got effectively. We already have so much tech, so many methods, etc. And I don't think we're exploiting those and looking at the masses of resources that we already have, and fantastic knowledge we already have, and really leveraging that already. And I don't just mean funky graphics, you know, funky retro graphics, etc. So if you haven't seen this, I think this is quite amusing. It puts in quite a good way. This is Chris Hecker, and he's not a particularly popular figure, I grant you that. He doesn't always talk sense either, definitely grant you that. But he did quite an interesting rant on the GDC rant panel a couple of years ago, where he didn't say a single thing. What he did was he spliced together videos to illustrate the point. And it's called Fair Use, and if you're going to look it up, I would suggest find the 10-minute video on YouTube, which someone's filmed from the audience. Because if you just watch the pure film, it doesn't quite make so much sense. But in context, it makes a lot more sense. So that's what I would do. And it's just 5 minutes or so, 5 or 6 minutes at a GDC rant. It's called Fair Use, and his point was, so he did this just at the turn of the new generation, when the PS4 and Xbox One had been announced and about to be released. And he took videos of people saying, oh yeah, doing all this, we can do new things, we can make new games, we can make, and the one I really like is, we can make characters that you really engage with and really care about. This is exactly the same time that a trailer for Killzone Shadowfall is being played, and obviously someone is shooting someone else in the face. Characters that we really care about. And he's got a point. We used all that technology, for what? All these new things. So the obvious question is, why? Why do we do that? Why is that happening? So this is a diagram by I don't know how many people have heard of her. Probably several of you. Nicole Lazzaro, who is a mobile consultant. Is a consultant in the games industry. She does a lot of work with mobile mainly these days. She's been around for about 15, 20 years, so she kind of knows the stuff, and she's been around a while. And this is her company Zeo Designs. One of their schematics you can just go and get for free off their website, and it is really worth a look. It's very well made. It's called the 4 Keys to Fun, and her idea is there are 4 main types of fun to be had in games, and best-selling games normally have 3, at least 3, if not 4 of those kinds of types of fun. You have hard fun, easy fun, serious fun, which I don't think is particularly serious, but it's what she calls it, and then people fun. Fun, obviously, is the other thing that we really talk about, actually, arguably more than graphics and sound, as we should. Fun is the other thing in games. Needless to say, there's nothing wrong with fun. I mean, whatever fun is. Can anyone tell me what fun is? No, don't, actually. Let's not start that debate right here. But, fun is a bit of a slippery concept at the best of times. But obviously, whatever fun is, it's good. Alright? But, I think we've got to this point where we have this we worship fun, and we have this relationship with fun where we hold it supreme above everything else to the exclusion of everything else. And we put it on this great big pedestal if people can't work out the images, because it's a bit again, this is a difficult picture to try and illustrate for the internet. If you try and get worship, it's lots of churches, things like this. I couldn't really quite make anything of it. So this is some people bowing down to an idol that I've replaced with SpongeBob, just because he's holding up fun. Again, that's a difficult thing to find on the internet. So I call this like our fetish with fun, because we obsess about it. We obsess about it all the time. And so I'm going to return to this in a few moments. And I'd like to posit that actually this is not the be-all and end-all of what we can do with our medium. I think you can broadly think about things in a couple of different ways. So you can think about games. This is just a way of thinking about things. You can think about games as art, if you like, or you can think about games as product. Now, I'm not talking about the actual final product, I'm talking about the intentions here. So that's very important to make clear, it's about intentionality, right? So what do I mean by art? Well, for this conversation, I'm saying that art is something that interrogates the art form itself, challenges preconceptions, questions assumptions about the art form about the medium that have already been made, often do it for critical acclaim, and often do it for personal satisfaction, probably more commonly for personal satisfaction rather than critical acclaim. That's why I'm talking about art as games as art here. And then games as product is more where your customer is absolutely king. A bit more risk averse, because often there might be a bit more money. There's a bit more money involved, and that's a lot of the reason, the driving force behind it. They make games to make money. It doesn't mean you don't love what you do, But the game is there to make money. And another thing I want to make really clear is this isn't a judgment call. This is just two ways of thinking. One example, a very extreme example, if you could even call it a game, and I wouldn't personally, is Mountain. It's interesting, I wouldn't call it a game. But people talk about it as game as art, so let's just go with that, shall we, as an extreme example. And then at the other end, it's easy to pick one out, but Advanced Warfare will do. So this is obviously a fairly binary split, or a fairly arbitrary spectrum. I mean, the reality is, it's a bit more of a mix, isn't it? There's always going to be art in product and product in art. And in fact, some of the best pieces of art down through the ages in every single form of medium has actually been a product. Michelangelo didn't paint the Sistine Chapel for the lols, for the joy of it. He did it because someone said, Mickey, do you want to earn some cash? Yes. Raffaello, whatever your name is. Yes, I'd like to earn some cash. Can you go and paint that ceiling? Yeah, great. Okay. So, there might be a conversation like that. Or, Handel's Messiah. Handel's Messiah wasn't built, Bill. That sounds like a game dev, doesn't it? It wasn't written because Handel wanted to give glory to his God and because he's such a deep religious man. It's because someone said, I need some music to play to these people in 3 weeks. Here's a fat check, would you like it? And Handel's like, yes. He went and locked himself away for 3 weeks to earn cash. So, but no one would argue about the artistic merits of that these days. So, this is a fairly arbitrary thing, but the problem is not that these things exist, that games as a product exist. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. The problem is when this is all that exists, and that we get such a small decrease going towards games as art. That's what I would say the problem is. It's the diversity of our medium. This illustrates something that this really bothered me. So I haven't played Mass Effect 3 yet. I played 1 and 2. But the fact that I'm presuming I'm talking to Initiator will know what Mass Effect is. Yes. Yeah, fine, wonderful. Okay. If you shook your head there at that point, I'm sorry. So Mass Effect, I thought the fact that BioWare re-released the ending as something different was an appalling thing to do. It was absolutely appalling. That was their game. It was their game that they spent their money on. It's their game, it's their vision. And alright, so consumers don't like it. They're perfectly entitled to didn't think the ending was much. Alright. But I thought that them releasing the ending to change it compromised, I thought that said something about games. That games are only there as a product to serve consumers. And I felt that they actually compromised on their integrity as artists. So I mean, granted that might sit, my very, very arbitrary spectrum. I might sit more towards games as product. But still, I felt that compromised something. In what is, I really like Mass Effect. What is a good example of what some of our medium can do. There's a real compromise of the intentions behind it, I felt. So enough of that talk about how I think we've got here and what I think the problem is. So what is an emotion? So some of you might have thought I was going to come here and talk about, give you a step-by-step blow about what is an emotion and how we can talk about different emotions. The problem there is no one else really knows what an emotion is either. This is 4 of the most popular theories that are kicking about at the moment. Plutchik is a bit more historical. So you can see here, this is Robert Plutchik, I think he was French. And he tried to organise all the emotions along these kind of leaves here, and it kind of gets so far. You've got annoyance, anger, and rage on this red petal, but it kind of breaks down with things like boredom, disgust, and loathing, which I don't really see boredom as being disgust and loathing, personally. So trying to categorise emotions is really, really hard. Orton, Clore, and Collins, this is a group, they're quite well known in computational AI, when people are talking about emotional expression with AI. They have different kinds of motivations. Ekman, has anyone ever seen Lie to Me, the American drama series? 1 or 2 people. So the character, Cal Lightman, the lead character is played by Tim Roth, that basically is Paul Ekman. It's all based on Paul Ekman's research. So for those who haven't seen it, Paul Ekman, he spent a very long time analysing different cultures, different areas of the world, and he posited and came up with there are 7 emotions and then corresponding facial expressions for those emotions. 7 basic emotions, all people, all times, anywhere. And they are fear, anger, what's that one? Fear, anger, disgust, sadness, content, surprise, and happy. So there's your 7 basic emotions. That was done in the 70s, but even he has revised that to, like, he keeps on changing his mind. I think we're up to 19 emotions now. First it was 15, then it went down to 13, now it's gone up to 19. And then Nico Frege is a Dutch psychologist. He's retired now, but he still publishes. He's a Dutch psychologist, and he talks a lot about different emotions. But the problem here with, like, what is an emotion, it's just fraught with problems. These things I just spoke about, this is just cognitive psychology, and I haven't even mentioned anybody who talks about embodied emotion, the conceptual act model, what is emotion, what is affect. Everyone's got a different definition, I'll tell you that for nothing. That is a minefield to try and get through. Everyone disagrees on what is emotion, what is affect, and what counts as action tendencies. So that's just psychology, and then you can go to psychoanalysis, Kleinians, the Jungians, Freudians, the Lacanians, philosophy. I don't know why I didn't put any names up there, but people like Dennett or Noel Carroll. You could go on and on forever. So you'll be pleased to know that I'm not actually going to go into detail about lots of those things. I think it'd be more constructive to talk about some other ideas, some broader concepts that I think would actually help people start thinking about games in a different way. So, I mean, one thing is, obviously there are games out there, and mileage will vary. This list will be different for you as it is for me, and so it should be. These are games that I feel do emotional engagement in a very interesting manner. So this is where, just shout out if you know what they are, so I can stop talking for a moment. This one?
Passage.
Yeah, that one?
Is that the marriage?
It's not the marriage, but I'll tell you, I'll give people a few more moments for that one. That's a really good one, actually. If I'll come back to it.
Is that Matty Bryce?
Shadow of the Colossus.
So that's Shadow of the Colossus. Dear Esther, good. Well done. That one? Easy. Yeah. That one is the marriage.
Is that second one down Matty Bryce's game, the title of which I forget?
It's not Matty Bryce's, it's Merrick Copas, that one. So this is Lim. Lim is a really interesting. Lim is one of my favourites for using systems and mechanics to portray a complicated concept. So for those of you who don't know, Lim, so Merrick Copas is a transgender woman. The trans woman made this game for a game jam. I think it's made in Game Maker. And what it is, you're square, you're this square, and you go through some corridors and you come out into these rooms where these other squares are. You can see they're a different colour. So you can hold a button to blend in with them and become the same colour as them. If you don't do that, they will start attacking you and giving you abuse. And you can't die, but they will attack you and make the screen shake and make it difficult to reach the exit for each room. If you hold the button down and blend in, become the same colour, then they will leave you alone, but the screen will start to zoom in very gradually, making you feel quite claustrophobic, and it will start to blur and shake and like basically impart the fact that it's getting very stressful for you. It is a beautiful use of systems to portray, in that circumstance, obviously the stressful effects of having to fit in and trying to be a transgender woman in a vaguely cis world. So, looking at it's worth looking at some case studies. Seeing how they do it. And by doing, one method of doing this is by doing something called a close reading. So, if anyone doesn't know what close reading is, a close reading is when you basically really look at a game in absolute detail and you make every effort to try and wring all the meaning that you possibly can out of it. And that's not just playing it to death as a player, it's not just playing it as a designer or as an artist, as we all do with games. We all know that's a different mindset. It's really trying to be a little bit more objective about it, although not too much. Trying to be a bit more objective and over-reading into it, essentially. What is all the possible meanings that can come from this? And when you start to do that, you really start to see a lot of connections, a lot of things that you didn't see before. And you look at every single little bit. It's really worth looking at. So, I've talked about the fun thing and how I think there's an overemphasis on that. So what would I suggest people do instead? I think it's more important for us to say to try and make games that are engaging rather than fun. And if I can illustrate it with this, if you think of the film Schindler's List, so Schindler's List then. Is it entertaining? Could arguably be said to be entertaining. Is it fun? I'd challenge anyone to say that Schindler's List is fun. That could be an interesting discussion down the pub. Do you feel good when you leave? When you leave or when you turn it off? No, probably not. Is it worth any less for it? No. But it's an engaging experience, it's an engaging film. And there's all sorts of films you can think of like that. So think about making games engaging. Additionally, mechanics. People often start their games with mechanics, and I think indies particularly do this. Like, you take a mechanic, you make loads of prototypes, oh, we've seen that mechanic, and you take that mechanic, and you polish that mechanic, ad infinitum. We've got a wicked mechanic, lots of gameplay, now we're going to kind of fit a story and themes and stuff around it. Nothing wrong with that per se, but as an alternative strategy, what about if you started with the message? What do you actually want to say with this game? What do you want to convey with this game? All those games on my case study slide that I put up earlier, to me is absolutely clear that for each of those games, the designer or group of designers or developers thought about what do we want to say with this game before anything else, and then they moved on to the rest of it. The mechanics, the aesthetics, the story and the technology. Additionally, abstract representation. That could be abstract art. Why go for being ultra realistic or cartoony style? Well, there's so much other fun you can have with visual representation. And not just visual representation, but also kind of like representation of objects as allegories for things, so like objects and systems being metaphors for stuff. So think about being a bit more abstract. Not everything has to be, totally clear all the time. Environmental narrative, that's a bit of a no-brainer for games. We all know about this, what stories can you tell with the environment and the objects in your game? But a lot of people forget about this. We know it's there, but it kind of gets forgotten about. Maybe try doing stuff with as little dialogue or no cutscenes. What can your actual game systems and environment tell the player? Music. This gets left out a lot of the time. God knows why. It's the quickest hotline to people's emotions, and by golly, it's normally cheaper than doing all your graphics, etc. Don't forget your sound artist. Who's a sound artist or sound person here? There you go. Love your sound people, all right? They will help you get to someone's emotional core quicker than your artist. Sorry, artists. Okay, but with that kind of thing. And not only this is one of the biggest things. When you put those things together in a way where not everything is absolutely 100% clear, you know what will happen? Often, if you do it the right way, your player will fill in the gaps for you. So if they're filling in the gaps for you, then they make those connections themselves. And if they are making the connections, they will make connections in such a way, in a nuanced way, so that it particularly resonates with them. You don't have to make everything ambiguous all the time. There's different types of ambiguity. Who is this? Who is the avatar? Where am I? Where am I going? What's this system? How does this thing work? You wouldn't do it all at the same time because this would be a confusing mess. But think about different ways you can use ambiguity in your game. Ambiguity is one of the most underused tools that we all seem to be really scared of using. I mean, with good reason. But we could really use it a lot more. And the more space you leave for the player to put themselves in, the more thinking they have to do to put themselves into the game, then often the more emotional payback they're going to get. So, in conclusion, what I'd like to say is think about starting your games with the message, not with a mechanic. Think about focus on making your games engaging rather than just fun. Leave space for the player to, what are they going to do? Give some of the work to them. And then think about, maybe, where do you sit along this art and product, continuum? Where do you feel you want to sit? It's fine to sit on one side or the other, but, me personally, obviously, I'm pushing for that. But have a think about it. Questions? Questions?
Yeah, if you're
My voice projects quite well, so
Okay, who wants to go first?
Yeah, so on one of your quite early slides, you had a list of heavily played games. One of the things I noticed about that is that you were talking throughout your talk about things like art and about films and novels and music, but in fact many of the games on that frequently played list looked to me a lot more like sports.
Do you mean the case studies that I had up earlier?
No, the much earlier list where you had
Steam.
It was it was a Steam list, and you were saying, isn't it a shame that all these games that it's these that are most played? Many of those games I think are more like sports than the things you were actually comparing them to, and I wonder if maybe the reason why you feel they don't portray a big range of emotions is because actually you get more or less the same range of emotions that you do in sport. So in that sense, is the comparison perhaps unfair?
I think the only one that you'd count as a sport was Dota 2, which is always going to be at the top of any Steam list of any metric whatsoever. I mean, that definitely is a sport. I mean, that definitely would rank what you're talking about there. I think, no, most of the games there I think were single-player games. I had a look. I mean, there's some multiplayer
Can you
games.
put that slide back
Yeah,
up?
I saw a lot of them.
I meant more perhaps in terms of what the player is engaging in rather than whether they're competitive or considered esports.
Say that again?
Well, more in terms of what the player is actually doing within the game rather than whether they're considered an e-sport or whether they're formally like a sport. It's just, you know, if you're performing physical tasks and jumping around and interacting in a very sport-like way, I wonder if that's a better metaphor for what's going on.
I think we're in difficult territory because it's like define sport-like way. I mean, I don't.
Sorry, that was a bit circular.
I don't do a lot of jumping when I play like Evolve or Dota 2 or things like that. But then it's a bit. I'm just thinking of playing of games. I mean, lots of those are still single-player games. There's some in multiplayer. Your top few are always going to be multiplayer, aren't they?
Yeah, that's a fair comment. But would you like to highlight which ones you think there should have been more emotionally? You know, that they're missing an opportunity rather than just that it's not appropriate.
It's so, like I said, it's not that these games exist. It's just that there's an overbalance towards one end, you know, one type of game rather than others. It's just that I don't, you know, there's not enough games that are really trying to deal with kind of emotional, the broader emotional experience that is possible within that list. So it's not the fact that any of those exist, it's the fact that there's a lack of diversity. It's the fact
So
that
if we
only
compare-
those exist.
If we compare, for example, the number of people that read a literary novel yesterday with the number who watched a football match, is that not the same comparison?
I don't see how that's a comparison at all.
Well, because the numbers that you have up here on the slide are people who are doing the video game equivalent of playing football rather than reading some Booker Prize-winning novel.
Why are they? I don't know why you'd see that as one or the other. That it's a list of people playing games.
Yes, but this is exactly. But it's statistical. It's what they're actually playing.
I still don't get the connection.
I think he's saying in their leisure time, they've got a choice of what they could spend their time doing.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm sure all of us have thought, should I go to a gallery today, or shall I'm a bit tired, I'm just going to sit down in front of the television, computer, or whatever it might be, or shall I go and play some football, or shall I watch some nothing ever? I'm going to withdraw that comment. I'm not even going to talk about football, I think. But my point, you know, it relates to the same question, which is why I was kind of stealing the mic from Dom. But in our decompressed time, we're almost thinking, I'd like to do something relaxing. But you also have like invest time, and I think we use those times for different things. And I think what I'm wondering is whether many of the people that sit down to play some of these games, they're thinking, I've got decompressed time now, like, you know, when I pooped in the evening. Whereas sometimes I'll think, you know what, I'm going to have another stab at Don Quixote. You know, it's painful, but it's going to be worth it. It's not something I enjoy, but I'm still trying to get through the damn book. Right. But you know what I mean? It's like they're different times, and I wonder whether what we're talking about is actually how do we get people to consider a game as a thing which is worthwhile in invest time, where and the question becomes why do I spend what time in my invest time? You know.
I think really what you said. I like your analogy of decompressed time and invest time. But then the question there is like, so people might be decompressed time there, but then I would say there aren't a lot of games for people to go out there and do the invest time, as it were. So that's kind of essentially what I'm trying to talk about.
And how do we get them to spend that? You know, why would somebody think of it you know, I've got some invested time.
By
I'm going to spend the time
making
playing
more
a game.
diverse games. I mean, so the kind of games I think which are heading in the right direction are things like Duest, or quite frankly, a lot of the walking simulators or first-person experiences, to use the non-pejorative term. I think a lot of those are starting to head in the right direction. Or things like the games that I named there, you know, like Journey, you know, which is still a AAA. Or there's lots of there are like several, you know, indie games that are out there that are obviously on that kind of emotional spectrum. But again, it's a balance thing. It's about, you know, most stuff that you see out there, and this is a mix of indie and AAA, which is why I picked a Steam list. You know, so how do we convince people? I think by making more of those games. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, and lots of people say, "Oh, it will happen. We're only 30 years old." But I'm not. Quite frankly, I'm not willing to just sit on my laurels and just let it happen and evolve, and maybe it'll come about by the time I die.
Will making the games result in them coming?
I think it's a half and half situation.
Okay. Because, you know, it's a build it and they will come. It seems to be your answer.
No, not straight away.
I'm afraid we've run out of time now, but we are going to have a short tea break. So if you want to carry on the discussion,
And I will be in the pub afterwards.
yeah, feel free. So thank you very much, Tom.
Cheers.